Michael Moston, B'nai B'rith Canada.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Michael Moston. I am the CEO of B'nai B'rith Canada, which represents grassroots Jewry in this country and our human rights arm, the League for Human Rights. I'd first like to thank James Pasternak for his continued advocacy on behalf of human rights in this city. And I'd also like to thank you, Mayor Tory, for your support and for ensuring that this report came out in March as opposed to June, following Quds Day 2019 as was originally scheduled. We were nervous last year that there would be issues, and lo and behold, we see a deeply flawed report that avoids answering the primary requests of this executive committee. Today marks the Jewish holiday of Purim, when the evil Persian vizier Haman instigated a plot to kill every single Jew who lived in the Persian Empire. It is ironic that today of all days we are talking about hate-sponsored rallies, including Quds Day, an event inspired by the brutal and terrorist Iranian regime under Ayatollah Khomeini. This is because the inspiration for Quds Day mirrors the evil thinking of Haman. It is an annual event drenched in anti-Semitism against the Jewish people. The Iranian regime, with its frequent calls for the destruction of Israel, its Holocaust denial contests brutal human rights violations against its own citizens, including women, homosexuals, and religious minorities, and state-sanctioned terrorist activity, does not shy away from its continued animosity towards members of our community. On June 19, 2018, the Executive Committee adopted Item 35.6 with amendments. I will now summarize how the direction of the Executive Committee was not followed and are not answered in this report. One, committee requested the Toronto Police Service Board to determine whether a Toronto Police Service general occurrence had been generated in response to the incidents on Quds Day rally on last June, and confirm that the Hate Crime Unit is conducting an investigation. The report indicates a letter was written to the police and with no elaboration. Second, the committee requested the Ministry of the Attorney General to conduct an expedited review of the Hate Crime Unit investigation of Quds Day rally once and if it is submitted. And again, a letter was written and there was no elaboration. Third, the committee requested that the city manager report back to Executive Committee in the first quarter of 2019 on the status of the request to Toronto Police Service Board referred to in Recommendation 1, as well as consultation and survey results identified in the staff report. For the first point, the status of the Toronto Police Service Board request is absent from the report. When I was here deputizing last year, I explained how organizers annually bypassing the rule of law in the city do not apply for permits for Quds Day. This survey asked not one question about this reality and therefore does not consider an Quds Day hate rally type scenario. And recall that they were originally asked to produce this report in 2017. There was no consultation, to my understanding, with stakeholders outside of this survey. The report indicates that none of the legal scholars identified by city staff chose to meaningfully engage in its survey process. The Executive Committee requested a consultation with constitutional and charter rights scholars, not to have them fill out a survey, particularly one as fundamentally flawed as this one was. As such, in my opinion, they failed in their duty to consult. The report states that only two groups responded to the survey as organizations, my own organization of the League for Human Rights and the Long Branch Neighborhood Group. Point 4, there was requested the city manager report back to the Executive Committee on the means at the city's disposal to address protests featuring hate speech, including possible recovery of costs. Item 4, as amended by yourself, Mayor Tory, was one of the key elements of our discussion before the Executive Committee when this was addressed last year when I also appeared. And yet, there is no discussion of possible recovery of costs for the city in this report for action. We all deserve to know the answer to this important question, as it is essential in plotting out a pathway forward to dealing with rogue hate rallies in the City of Toronto, particularly those which bypass the city permitting process, put those who do not play by the rules at a financial advantage, and fail to comply with city bylaws and the city's anti-discrimination policy.
I have to ask you to wrap up too. We're at 2 times 5, which is 10. I didn't reset that.
Absolutely. Two last sentences. We ask respectfully that this report should not be accepted by the Executive Committee. And lastly, the Quds Day organizers must be held to account by the City of Toronto. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moston. Are there questions of this deputy? Councillor Pasternak.
Yeah, you've touched on a good point where many worthy causes in the city play by the rules. They apply for a permit. They pay the TTC rerouting fees, the solid waste fees, They pay for security. And they're supposed to sign a anti-discrimination commitment, part of our policy. We're trying to find out, and I think the report has missed it, I would agree, on what legal framework we have to deal with groups that don't play by the rules. Is that really a synopsis of what we're facing today?
I think it's very important, and particularly important when there are annual rallies taking place year over year with similar, if not the same, organizers involved, and seemingly nobody that can possibly be held to account because it's projected as just an event that pops up out of the blue. There's a lot of planning that takes place on this, and once again, the anti-discrimination policy of the city, which the City of Toronto abides by, is of course separate and apart and a different standard than the criminal code.
Now, you've heard the other deputants, and they made it seem like this was just a peaceful rally advocating for an identifiable group, that all the comments that we're citing in English and in Arabic and whatever language are out of context and are inaccurate. You've studied this rally for many years. Is this just a bunch of young people or people taking up a social cause and getting together and giving speeches of peace and harmony, and those comments are all taken out of context and really shouldn't be taken into account?
Thank you. In my opinion, that is not the case. This rally has been a global phenomenon, once again, since 1979, I believe, as part of the Ayatollah Khomeini revolution in Iran. It is drenched with anti-Semitism worldwide. There is all sorts of evidence for this around the world. There has been video documentation year over year of the City of Toronto and what has taken place. I believe that what generally has been reported is accurate. There is no question that there were Hezbollah flags on the City of Toronto. There is no question that there was expressions of support for Hezbollah, which is a listed terrorist organization in the City of Toronto, at these parades. And there was mention earlier about a Holocaust denier, and some of the previous deputants said they didn't research this and weren't aware of anything that was said, yet had very firm opinions without perhaps doing that research. But in my opinion, this individual is a Holocaust denier. This individual left a teaching position at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 2006 for supporting the false notion that 9/11 was an inside job of the United States government against its own citizens in collaboration with the Israeli government. This individual has repeatedly questioned the $6 million figure of Jews that perished in the Holocaust at the hands of the Nazis, and denounces the Holocaust religion in quotation. So I do believe that is a fair characterization of an individual that was brought in from outside of this country to be one of the keynote speakers at a previous rally.
So to summarize, how if Toronto doesn't stand for something, in other words, if Toronto doesn't stand up against this kind of rhetoric and demonization and call for violence, what is the city government for? What is our anti-discrimination policy for? What is the criminal code for?
Yes, I would entirely agree with you. Toronto holds itself out as a multicultural city that is open and welcoming to everyone. And that is the image we're projecting to the world. The world is now watching us on how we deal with this particular scenario. The Jewish community feels targeted by this rally. Individuals who fled the Iranian regime feel targeted by this rally and by similar type rhetoric out there in society. So this is an important issue, and we ask the Executive Committee to treat it seriously and to make its best efforts.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Pasternak. Any other questions for Mr. Moston? Okay, thank you, Mr. Moston.
Thank you very much.